Hi guys, and welcome to GeeK TALK, where we talk deep and geek about pianos, keyboards, and synthesizers. Is that over the top? I can never tell. So my good friend and fellow YouTuber Espen Kraft recently released a video on his YouTube channel where he did a walk through one of the keyboard magazines. Now, I believe he does this on his channel. He takes publications from the 80s and he reads through them, which is a nice move. But in this particular episode, he was going through the keyboard magazine October 1986, and he starts and he kind of flips through it and talks you through the edition. Fabulous. Join his channel, watch it. Very, very entertaining. But I want to discuss the segment he did on Depeche Mode. So this was October 1986, and this would have been sort of in the Black Celebration period, because remember, Black Celebration was released in March 1986. So this is going to be a fascinating, not a reaction video, but kind of like a review video. So I'm going to kind of play the video of what Espen is saying, and I'm going to sort of pause it and interject every now and then. So let's just see how that pans out. Right, let's jump into it. Just one quick thing. You'll notice when this video comes up now, it'll say demo mode in the middle of the screen. I'm so sorry about that. It's a long story, but I've basically installed a new version of Screen Grab into my other computer. And as a result, although I've bought it, I have not authorized it yet. So it was running in demo mode. So forgive me that it says demo mode in the middle of the screen. I did think of refilming it, but I just thought, I'm sure they'll forgive me. So sorry about that. Anyway, here's the video. Right, Espen, my brother, take it away.
I'd love to hear about it. And here's another great feature of this issue, the wilder side of Depeche Mode. And this article is primarily focused on Alan Wilder, as Alan Wilder was the only one that would actually talk to Keyboard Magazine at this time about the gear used, the tech used, and how they set up their live rig for this tour at this time. And they start off the interview by letting him talk about that his interests has always been more with the musical rather than with the technical side of things.
Okay, interesting there. His interest is more in the musical rather than the technical side of things. Yes, I mean, I think initially, being an arranger, and then I think with the knowledge of wanting to know how things are done, that spurs you on to learn about more production. So I really think, especially sort of from music for the masses and indeed through Violator onto Songs of Faith and Devotion, he'd really honed his production skills. But I mean, even at this stage, when 1986, this would have been the Black Celebration period, Alan was the guy who was doing all the, not only, helping get the arrangements sit where they need to be within the albums, but also, so far as going onto the road. I mean, that's a very challenging thing. Making a record is a hell of a thing in itself, but then taking that onto the road and making sure that it translates properly. When people go and see a band performing the music that they've, that they, the fans, love, it needs to translate and it needs to stand up to the audience expectations. So, and also Alan wanting to, or being happy to talk to keyboard magazines and stuff. No disrespect to Fletch and Gore, but they, at this point at least, I don't think they had the knowledge, and it's very difficult when you do become quite famous and successful. There are people out there to kind of discredit you and take you down. So, had Fletch and Martin done those interviews, I think it could have been a little bit disastrous. But and once again, I always said that this was the great thing about this band, was everyone had their kind of official roles, although it wasn't written in stone. It was kind of like, Dave, you're the singer, Martin, you write the songs, Alan, you're the musician, Fletch, you're the clapper. And, everyone had their role. And I think this is in this kind of golden period where everyone, because everyone knew where they stood and what they were doing, there was no conflict. Of course, later on, we all know there was conflict. But for now, Alan was still the main musical force in this band.
So he worked on different stuff before joining the group. And he was looking through Melody Maker for jobs and saw an ad for a name synthesizer band looking for a new keyboard player. And so he auditioned with about 20 other applicants, and he got the job.
We all know that story. Alan, he lied about his age. Of course, I think they wanted someone that was, I think you had to be up to the age of 20. I think Alan was 21 at the time. I don't know exactly. But the rest is history. And on documentaries and interviews, Dave Vaughn has spoken about how a lot of people that came for the audition, a lot of them couldn't play. And when we see that a lot in the music industry, there are so many people who are so, it's all about the art and the image, but they've got no talent or original ideas. So I can imagine a lot of morons coming to audition. But of course, you take a guy like Alan, he looks fantastic. And as Dave said, he could play two different parts, and he could play a bass line here and a completely different part, like that thing where you tap your stomach and you rub your head in the opposite direction. Great coordination, and he could sing at the same time. So the rest is history. All right, back into this.
That's cool. He goes on saying he didn't know of the band at the time. He hadn't heard any of the songs either. That's pretty cool. It's actually interesting to read that both Gore and Fletcher declined to talk to Keyboard Magazine at this time, and the reason seems to be that Depeche Mode did not consider itself a keyboard band and didn't want to seem like they were endorsing any special type of brand or type of gear.
Once again, there we go. Gore and Fletcher were reluctant to talk to Keyboard Magazine because they didn't see themselves as a keyboard band. A lot of people, if you're a musician, you will understand this. I think if you're not a musician, you won't know exactly what that means. And of course, you see Depeche Mode standing there playing keyboards, but very often a lot of those keyboards were samplers with the integral sounds from the production loaded into that. It's not a sort of keyboard band as such. Even if you take something like let's be random, like Aha. When they go live, the keyboardist, what's his name? Mags, forgive me, Pell. Sorry, I forgot his name. Anyway, he will go there and he will play songs that are, but there is more room for him to kind of maneuver and to improvise a little bit more. I've mentioned this in my videos a lot, and I'm not going to get into it now, is that Depeche Mode, there is no room for improvisation. I know they do these days in the live setups, but they're a very different band these days. But once again, just coming back to the interviews, Alan was the one who did the interviews.
But apparently Alan Wilder wanted to talk about different types of stuff. Good for us. At this point, they have a lot of tracks on backing tapes for their live performances. And so they prepare the tapes. That's basically something Wilder do. And an interesting question. You got 3 keyboard players on stage spread out across a broad setup. When playing live, are you able to maintain visual contact with one another? And Wilder's response, no, that's not really too important to us. We're cued by what we've prepared on the tapes. And another interesting question, do you each have your own monitor mix? What we all have is an overall rough mix in the side fills of the whole band, except I don't have Fletcher's synthesizers in my fills because they're really not necessary. So no surprises there. Another thing.
I love Espen's reaction. So no surprises there. Moving on. Espen, you are off Fletcher's Christmas card list this year. You will not be getting any Christmas cards from Fletcher this year. So there, Alan was asked, is it necessary that they can see each other? Well, of course not. That's not necessary. And of course, they have monitor mixers now. If you're a musician or in a band, you will understand that, when you're playing live in a band situation, it is not necessary for you to hear every single member. That really depends. We don't want to go into this now, but as far as monitor mixers are set up, for those of you who are not musicians, very often when you watch a band, let's say a conventional 4-5-piece band, very often the bassist can only hear the drummer or the singer. It depends. It really depends. Each musician has the luxury these days of being able to hear who they choose to hear. And it's just some musicians, when they playing live, they like to be able to hear everyone. For some musicians, it's too distracting, so they would only choose to prefer to hear one other member. That is why very often I know bassists, not always, but often, they only want to hear the drummer and the singer, and anything else will throw them off. And the fact that Alan said it's not necessary to hear Fletch. I just love that. Anyway, let's go back. Where are we now? Let's just go back a little bit.
Because they're really not necessary. So no surprises there. Another thing, they have a problem with Dave's vocal being very, very loud in the monitor systems, and they're working to get that down in level, I can imagine. And then the interview goes on about the aspects of touring, etc., the stage setup in terms of percussion. But one question, which I turn that back, from watching you perform, it appears that Andrew Fletcher on the extreme right of the stage does most of the bass lines. Well, he says, Alan Wilder, not really. He does bass on one or two songs. It's difficult to explain what everyone does because we all swap and do different things at different times. Some of the bass parts are on tape. Some of them I play. A couple of them Andy plays. Okay.
If I can just jump in there. I mean, especially in later later periods. In the earlier periods, I think some of the bass lines would have been played by Fletch, not all. You must remember, if it's a sequenced bass line, if it's something like, I don't know, let me just think of, okay, let's be random. Let's take No Disco. I saw you playing the picture, blah, 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 blah. This ain't no disco. That bass line, it's programmed. There's no way you're going to stand there and go, you just, I don't even if you're Alan Wilder, you will never get it in time with a drum machine. So bass lines like that, real sequenced bass lines like that, would be on the backing tape. There's just no other way around that. The only bass lines that Fletch would play live, if he did, would be bass lines like Just Can't Get Enough, where it's dum 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 dum, because that is playable. It's not something that needs to be played like as if that was sequenced, if you know what I mean. Also, if I think songs like Tora Tora Tora, dum da 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 da, those kind of played bass lines, but most of the bass lines would be on the backing tape. Right, let's just go back a little bit.
Swap and do different things at different times. Some of the bass parts are on tape. Some of them I play. A couple of them Andy plays. Okay, so what equipment are you using on this tour? Well, he says Martin uses an Emulator 2 and a PPG 2.2. Andy has a Sequential Prophet 2000, and I have an Emulator 2 and a Korg Poly 800. That's interesting. The Korg is very much a secondary keyboard, he says. For those times when you can't fit the last sound on the emulator patch, because they use one disc per song, so they have to change discs throughout the show, and if they have too much sounds needed for a song, he is using the Korg Poly 800 to complete the setup for that song.
Just interjecting there, it just shows what limitations they were dealing with them, back in those days, because the emulators essentially were loaded from floppy disks. So you would have the backing track on tape, but each individual member would have to load their sounds into their emulators. And, we're talking, there is a loading time, and that was quite stressful, I think, sometimes, because as soon as the song starts, you've got to load up your bank of sounds. And they've spoken how challenging that was, because these things take a while to load. It's tuck, 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 tuck. It's not instantaneous like these days, but that was all factored into the show. They'd have extended introductions, or there'd be enough time for each keyboard to load the necessary sounds that needed to be played. But I mean, it is fascinating reading this publication from 1986 and just hearing the challenges that they had to face. Of course, fast forward to the present date, with things like Mainstage now, which cost nothing, and all other types of technology, things are so much easier. but you've got to have respect for this time where, I mean, this was the time of invention, and the technology was in its infancy. And I often say we go back to that time and we marvel at the sonic brilliance of records of that period. Right, let's just back it up a little bit so we can catch up from where we were.
Their keyboard, he says, for those times when you can't fit the last sound on the emulator patch because they use one disc per song, so they have to change discs throughout the show. And if they have too much sounds needed for a song, he is using the Korg Poly 800 to complete the setup for that song, apparently. He then get asked if you alter your sounds much during your performances, and he says, no, not at all. It's all pre-prepared. I work on the sounds a lot before we go on tour and make sure that every individual volume is the right for each sound. Every filter, every wheel position, all the tunings, everything is set up properly before we go on tour. So there's not any room for improvisation, it seems.
I've often mentioned this before, and this is something producers understand, if you're a musician. There's no room for improvisation. If you look at the way they perform now, they are very much a live band. And I know we have debates as to, some people prefer it and some people don't prefer it. We're not going to get into that now. But if you take like songs like Never Let Me Down Again, ding, 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 everything back in those days was played very metronomically and very sort of true to the album. But if you listen to like Peter Gaudino these days, if you hear like Never Let Me Down Again, he does throw in those little riffs and ad libs and little crush notes to give it kind of like a jazzy kind of feel. Whether that's your thing or not, we're not going to discuss that now. But you must understand that, and this comes back to earlier in this article where Fletch and Martin said, although we play keyboards, we're not really a keyboard band. And I understand that, because although they are playing keyboards, samplers, a lot of this, the whole approach of this band is, although you're playing keyboards, there's no room for improvisation really. So, I mean, if you're playing behind the wheel and you're going ding, 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 you can't improvise on that because it's just not that type of music. If you do improvise on it, it's just going to sound wrong, or it's going to sound like you made a mistake. So there is a certain rigidness in the way this type of music is performed. It is not a jamming kind of thing. And I think as a keyboardist and a performer, it would probably be, I don't want to say boring, but, every night, every performance is going to be the same. These are your parts and they have to be played note for note. So, it's a different art form. It's not conventional rock and roll. Well, let's just back up a little bit to catch up from where we were.
So there's not any room for improvisation, it seems. You have no rack-mounted effects on stage at all? No, we don't use any effects on stage. He says that all the sounds are sampled with the effects on it, so they don't have to faff around with that while doing their performances. And that's something I've noticed before as well in other interviews and videos I've seen of their live setups.
There's no effects units on the stage, and I think what they've always done, Depeche Mode, is they have minimized all the moving parts. I mean, even if you watch Martin Gore on guitar, he doesn't have any, there's no amps behind him or effects pedals or anything. Everything is done off stage. And once again, their approach is so different, and it's just the way they do it. So far as all the effects being on the keyboard sounds, I have noticed this in a lot of the samples that I have. When you hold down the key, it has full effects. However, there are some sounds that are quite dry, and it is my belief that those sounds will, once they hit the sound man, I think some effects will be added to those. But for the most part, the sounds on the keyboards were programmed with the full effects. It just made it easier. Right, let's back up a little bit.
Other interviews and videos I've seen of their live setups. Finally, they ask if, as a trained keyboardist, do you find any particular challenge to play with Depeche Mode? He says, our music is not particularly complicated. It never has been and probably never will be. There's no room for solos or anything like that. So purely from a playback point of view, the challenge for him is that he prepares everything in terms of music for that tour. So that's his main challenge, really. Do you have plans to go into some projects on your own, possibly outside the band's work? I have some sort of vague plans. Yeah, nothing too rigid. Playing organ for silent times?
Okay, we'll stop it right there. So, I mean, this video, I don't think you as the fan, you've probably not learnt anything new from this. It is fascinating, though, to read this publication from 1986. Thank you, Espen. This is a great video you've just done here. And it just kind of reinforces what we've always known. And just to emphasize on that last question where they asked Alan, is it challenging? And it's like, well, no. I mean, a lot of the parts that are played, the individual keyboard parts, you could probably take someone who's not a musician and teach them to play it in a very short period of time. Now, that's not an insult. It's not a competition. I think a lot of people don't really get that. I've seen on forums and things, and I don't get into these debates, is where some people they've gotten hold of the sound banks to, let's say, the songs from the Songs of Faith and Devotional period, and they're horrified to see that Alan Wilder on his sound banks has an entire chord programmed on one key, and they're like, oh no, man, Alan Wilder, he's programmed a whole chord into one key. And there's a lot that I could say, but all you need to know now is, and we will address this when I get to my Songs of Faith and Devotion album review series, all you need to understand is that the most important thing when you're in a band like Depeche Mode is translation. It's ensuring that what comes out of the speakers at a live performance sounds as close to the record as possible. And people can get anal or fanboy or over analytical as to how much or how little they're playing. At the end of the day, it's Depeche Mode, and the approach is so different. Hey man, we're still discussing this, and they've been around for years. Anyway, I want to thank Espen for this video. I think this was a great video he's done. I'm going to link in the description below so you can actually watch this full video, and do subscribe to Espen Kraft. He's a great guy, and he and I are going to be doing another video soon where we're going to discuss the keyboards and the production techniques from Depeche Mode and kind of elaborate on some of the content that he's discussed in this video. I hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Leave your comments in the description below. Let me know what you thought of this video. Would you like to see more videos like this? Until then, I'll see you again. Adios.